So the words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin. The word of the Lord came to him in the 13th year of the reign of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah, and through the reign of Joachim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, down to the 5th month of the 11th year of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, when the people of Jerusalem went into exile. So now here are the kings: Josiah, Joachim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah. And as you see, the major role players, so you have Nebuchadnezzar, who then starts is instrumental in the beginning of the end for Syria. And then you have Nebuchadnezzar, his son, who then makes sure that Assyria is wiped out, and then Egypt is no longer the powerhouse. And then he turns his attention to Judah, and there's stages of exile. And the first one actually happens in, I think, 602 BC. And you'll see that. Let's turn to 2 Kings. And you'll see that in 2 Kings. Second Kings 24. And it says, during Jehoiakim's reign, in verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded the land, and Jehoiakim became his vassal for 3 years. So he was his vassal for 3 years. And vassal, again, if you go back to suzerain vassal treaty, that's what a vassal is. A vassal is someone who is under the suzerain. So in this case, Nebuchadnezzar is a suzerain, and this poor vassal then has to make reparations, pay, so that the suzerain doesn't wipe him out. But also, if someone attacks this vassal, the suzerain technically should come help. Although I don't know if Nebuchadnezzar was that type of suzerain. He could have been, I don't know. But the point being that he was making payments. But then, bad move, Jehoiakim turns against Nebuchadnezzar and rebels. The Lord sent Babylon, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite. And this is where some people think Edom, the prophecy against Edom, we looked at in Obadiah, possibly happens in this time period. Doesn't mention Edom by name, but some speculate maybe they also came and piled on to Jerusalem as all these other people came. It's possible. So they came to destroy Judah in accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by servants, the prophets. Surely these things happened to Judah according to the Lord's command, in order to remove them from his presence because of the sins of Manasseh and all he had done, including the shedding of innocent blood. For it filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive. So that's what happens here. And I think that's the first time that that's the Daniel group that goes into Babylon. And not I think, I know. And it says that in Daniel. So I shouldn't say I think. It's I know, because the Bible actually says that in Daniel 1, verse 1. It actually gives you that piece of information. It says in Daniel 1, verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Joachim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So that's the Daniel group. Then in 97, under Jehoiachin, Nebuchadnezzar And that's also in 2 Kings 24, verse 8. Comes, and now there's a second group that goes. That's the Ezekiel group that goes to Babylon. Okay? And then finally, under Zedekiah, 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar comes, finally destroys completely Jerusalem and destroys the temple. And you read that in 2 Kings 24:17. And that's the time period that Jeremiah was operating in. So the big picture of Jeremiah, there is the pre-exilic time period, chapter 1 to 24. Then you had the judgment period where Jeremiah pronounces judgment from 25 to 45. Then judgment on other nations from 46 to 49. And then judgment on Babylon itself, 50 to 51. And then fall of Jerusalem, which again you read about in 2 Kings 24. So that's the big picture of Jeremiah. So again, the context, we read this with Josiah finding the Book of Covenant and then instituting massive reforms. But unfortunately, after Josiah, things just go back to the way it used to be. And Jehoash 23, he becomes king, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Pharaoh Necho put him in chains. So he rules for 3 months, this guy. And he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. I wondered, like, how much evil did he do in 3 months? You know, it's like, wow, that's pretty intense. But then, yeah, it's some real evil, you know. And then Pharaoh takes Necho, the guy who takes him out, and puts made Eliakim, son of Josiah, and changes Eliakim's name to Joachim. That's how you get Joachim. Okay? But he takes Jehoash and he's gone. Like, we don't hear from him, right? Joachim paid Pharaoh silver and gold, and that's paying tribute so that he doesn't take him out. Now, how does he get the silver and gold? He taxed the land and exacted silver and gold from the people in order to keep his power. And Joachim in 2 Kings 23, verse 37, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so just like his ancestors. And then after Joachim comes Jehoiachin, and guess what? He too does evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, what kind of evil? And this is where Jeremiah is being a covenant prophet. In Jeremiah 7 verse 9, will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal, follow other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name and say, we're safe? Safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name, and where does this ring a bell, become a den of robbers to you? Can anybody recall where this is from? And that's the connection point. But I have been watching, declares the Lord. So Jesus' temple action, again, and this is where when we don't understand Scripture and interconnect the Scriptures, we come up to a crazy conclusion. When Jesus drives out the moneylenders in the temple, and I'm not sure if you've heard this, but I know I have, Jesus was angry, so he was not sin-free. And then you have to do all kinds of mental gymnastics to, well, that's not anger, that's righteous indignation. And then you convince, oh, no, so therefore he didn't sin. And then, stop me if you have not heard this. Or then it's like, but I also can have righteous indignation. I'm indignant at your sin. I'm indignant at, you're not sharing your faith enough, and whatever indignation. All of that is just crazy assumptions. Jesus is taking this, and he is acting out a parable. He's acting out and saying, you are doing, and this is now Jesus' time, 33 AD, exactly what was happening in 7th century BC. Like, guys, come on, man, nothing's changed. You even went to exile over this. God brought you back And after 500, of bringing you back, give or take, you're still onto the same thing. You're still using my house as a den of robbers. Why? So he's acting out this prophetic parable just like Jeremiah did. And the people there would have clearly understood that he is doing exactly what a covenant prophet would do. So that's the meaning of that action. It's not about anger and it's just that's the covenant action a covenant prophet will take. And Jesus was a covenant prophet, among other things. Jesus was greater than a covenant prophet, but he certainly was that also. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So again, knowing the Bible is important, because otherwise we'll make up our own stuff and we think it's true. Now this is what Jeremiah is saying. Inside the temple, they are they're offering burnt offerings, and God is saying to them, go ahead, add your burnt offerings to your other sacrifice and eat the meat yourself. I don't want any part of it. Now what's the parallel for us? We show up to church on Sunday and we tithe. But Monday to Saturday, we're hitting the bars, we're immoral, we're racist, we are sexist, we're whatever, we just, but then, oh, hey, I go to church on Sunday. And that's what Jeremiah is calling them out on. Excuse me, sorry. And outside the temple will you steal and murder and commit adultery and perjury and burn incense to Baal and follow other gods you have not known. Seriously? That's the critique of the prophet. I'm sure we can relate to it very well, right? So I want to talk about the psyche of a prophet, because I think it's so important for us today. Here's what Jeremiah says to the Lord. Jeremiah 20 verse 7. You deceived me, Lord, and I was deceived. You overpowered me and prevailed. I'm ridiculed all day long. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I cry out proclaiming violence and destruction. So the word of the Lord has brought me insult and reproach all day long. You ever felt that way?
Well,
not to that degree.
yeah.
Right.
Ridiculed all day long. So I can't say no that I've been.
Not to that degree, but surely to some degree, we're sharing our faith on campus, or we're discipling someone, we're studying the Bible with someone, and it's like, man, this is painful.
Yeah.
And Jeremiah continues, but if I say I will not mention his word or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I'm weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot. So he has to speak. He has to be the covenant prophet God calls him to. And that brings me to Lamentations. People think, even though it's anonymous, people think that Jeremiah possibly wrote Lamentations. Now, Lamentations is essentially a poetry, and its poetry is what's called acrostic poem. An acrostic is each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Each verse begins with each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So the first alphabet is Aleph, and then it begins with that letter, which I think is this one here. And you have to read Hebrew from right to left. So these are the 22 alphabets. So you'll see chapter 1 has 22 verses for that reason. If you're interested in linguistics, and I encourage you to please take Hebrew, and if you have an interest in it, we need more Hebrew scholars. So this chapter 1 is it's talking about the city of Jerusalem. The second chapter, again 22 verses, because 22 Hebrew alphabets, speaks of the fall of the city. Chapter 3 is 3 verses per letter, so it's 66 verses. And chapter 4 back to 22 verses. Chapter 3 talks of the suffering, and chapter 4 gives you a glimpse of the before the invasion, before the siege, and then after. And check out chapter 5. I mean, this tells you this was detailed. This was not just random. Chapter 5 has no acrostic, meaning it's not following the same pattern of 1 to 4, because it's now highlighting the chaos, the horror of what took place. Lamentations 5 verse 19 to 22, and this is how it ends. You, Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. But why? Why do you always forget us? Why do you forsake us for so long? Restore us to yourself, Lord, that we may return. Renew our days of old, and ends on this line. Unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure. And that's how it ends. That's lamentation. That's the psyche of a prophet. He's broken at the devastation of his nation. Blessed are those who mourn, for they'll be comforted. And I preparing for this has been a blessing for me. It's challenging, but it's a blessing. Do I mourn for the state of the church, state of the world, state of people I know? Even in our discipling, do we love each other, and do we have that aching heart for one another? I can assure you I don't, but I want to grow. I don't, because at times I'm very clinical, like, just, it's what it is, you want to go down that road, then may the Lord be with you. But do I mourn? One of the most common things is dating or relationships. Do I mourn for a young person who's making choices, and I'm like, no, please don't. This is not a game. This is not. There's devastating consequences when we are attracted or we pursue attraction, and it's not going to lead well. And I know this. As an older person, I've seen it, I've heard it, and I know. But I don't always mourn. I just like, well, it's your life, And so again, that heart of love and heart of, please, rethink, because the choices we make has consequences. When we go about it our own way, it's not going to go well. So again, that heart of mourning for people, the psyche of a prophet. And I like to think that discipling, and something probably we should explore more, maybe we have to think of discipling in that light of being a covenant prophet. And again, it's not being a messenger of ourselves, but a messenger of God. And that doesn't mean we come up with our own message and write our own book. It means we go back to the Bible, but again, being a covenant prophet to each other. Jeremiah 25 verse 3, for 23 years from the 13th year of Josiah until this very day, the word of the Lord has come to me, and I've spoken to you again and again, but you have not listened. So how long has Jeremiah been preaching to his people? That's a long time. How often do we give up on a discipling relationship, for example? 23 minutes. Again, these are meant to challenge us, I think. To just be mindful of, am I invested in people, and am I being a covenant prophet? Again, the pressure is not on us to change people. So I just got to clearly say that. That's definitely not what Jeremiah did either. None of these prophets did that. I think they would have liked to if they could have changed, so they avoid these massive, tremendous, terrible consequences. But the onus is not on us to change people. It's to love them and to bring the message, and to do our part, to pray for them, to love them, to encourage them, to model Christ for them, and so on and so forth. But also part of that is persistence and perseverance and hope that they will change. God will change them. And that's where we got to go back to being covenant prophets, not personal prophets. It's our message. It's actually God's message, which we know because it's in the Bible. So again, 23 years, long time. Jeremiah 25 verse 5, they said, turn now each of you from your evil ways and your evil practices, and you can stay in the land the Lord gave you. Do not follow other gods to serve, worship them. Do not arouse my anger with what your hands have made. Then I will not harm you. But you did not listen. And you have aroused my anger with what your hands have made, and you have brought harm to yourselves. Again, idolatry is not just a bad idea, it's harmful. It harms us. And because you have not listened, I will bring people of the north and my servant Nebuchadnezzar, and I'll bring them against this land. And so that's the judgment that God proclaims by bringing Nebuchadnezzar at their doorstep. That's the job of covenant prophet, telling the difficult truth. It's hard. And it's often telling the difficult truth at great personal cost. I want to skip, because I'll come back to this just now, but I want to skip this. I do want to talk about this, because this is Jeremiah 29 verse 11. We have to share the news contrary to our own appetite for good news, for positive news, which we love. Even in our church family, we start meetings with, who has good news to share? And we share the good news of baptisms, or how many visitors we had, or whatever. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong. Please don't take me the wrong way. But honestly speaking, maybe this has happened to you, maybe it hasn't. I know it's happened to me, where I share good news of someone getting baptized, but I know they're struggling with their faith. I know that. They barely come to church. We're trying to get them, we're trying to resuscitate them. But they did get baptized, yeah. The good news, they got baptized, but I know the full story. It's very messy. Or we had 50 visitors, and that's great. It's exciting, but I also know that, they're not interested in studying the Bible. Or whatever. We know the story, but we want to share the good news. On a side note, maybe you have to think about that. Maybe that good news culture prevents us from being genuinely honest and vulnerable. Something to think about for your generation to solve. But it's that message of good. We want good news. We want to see great things happen. Jeremiah 29 verse 11. But this is the verse 1 starts in, this is the text of the letter the prophet Jeremiah sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders among the exiles, to the priests, prophets, and all the other people Nebuchadnezzar had carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. And it even tells you in parentheses, this was after King Jehoiachin and the queen mother, the court officials, leaders of Judah and Jerusalem, the skilled workers and artisans had gone into exile from Jerusalem. So these are the best and the brightest gone in 597 BC. And I won't read the whole thing in the interest of time, but I encourage you to read it. But I would read verse 5. See, so this is a letter gone to the exiles, and this is the message. Build houses, settle down, plant gardens, eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage. So they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in numbers there. Do not decrease. Verse 7, seek the peace and prosperity of Babylon. Seriously? To which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So pray for the enemy. Pray for those that have captured you as prisoners of war. Yes, says the Lord Almighty, do not let prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They're prophesying lies. Now you read verse 10. The lies is that they will be back within their lifetime. Well, they'll be back in a month or year, whatever the lies they're telling. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back. Verse 11, for I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. And that's our challenge as disciples and covenant prophets, to share the truth with the community, with the generation, with people who are obsessed with good news. Next time there's a good news sharing and you share, well, the truth is my ministry is not, we're struggling. We're not doing so well spiritually. I'm worried. That's bad news. But that's where we are at. But that's what this is about. I have plans to prosper and not harm you. He's directly speaking to the false prophets who's saying, hey, you're going to be back soon. And God's saying, no, you won't. 70 years, think about 70 years. That is probably 2-3 generations, give or take, right? So if you went to exile in Babylon, you're not coming back. Your grandkids might be coming back.
Sure.
So again, that's, yeah. And that's what this is, the time frame. This is when it's happening. They are in exile at 597 BC. So lessons from Jeremiah. Excuse me. Who was Jeremiah's audience? Who was he speaking to primarily? Yeah. Do you not see what they're doing in the towns of Judah, streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, fathers light fire. Women knead the dough and make cakes to offer to Ishtar, the queen of heaven. Jeremiah's audience is not Babylon, although he has things to say about Babylon. And that's what I was mentioning earlier. We're going to change the world when we as a community are being God's covenant people and making covenant people of the world around us. Jeremiah called out God's people who are failing to keep God's covenant, be God's people. And that's such an important lesson for us. Careful that we don't critique the world thinking that we are prophets to the world. And then all the while in our communities there is, God forbid, racial segregation. There is economic injustice. There is people going to bed hungry. And they're in our church. But we speak to the outside world as though they are the ones that need to clean up their act. That's, and I'm not preaching this to you as much as I'm speaking to myself. And that's where we have to pray. God, show us. Personally, I'm praying that myself. I don't want to be a hypocrite. How can I contribute to being God's covenant people? How's it, Paul? And that's where it's the, act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. There's a humility of being God's people. But clearly his audience was not out there. His audience was in here. So the lessons from Jeremiah: have courage to call God's people to covenant faithfulness. With love, lots of love. Lots of love. Lots of humility. Lots of vulnerability. Contrast this. Now let's contrast in treatment of Jeremiah. This is very cool, and not cool in a nice way. Contrast in treatment of Jeremiah by God's people and by the world, by Babylon. So God's people. Jeremiah 38 verse 1. I won't pronounce these names because I'm pretty sure I'll butcher them. But these gentlemen heard what Jeremiah was telling the people when he said, this is what the Lord says. Whoever stays in the city will die. By sword, famine, or plague, whoever goes over to Babylonians will live. So Babylon's at the gates, okay? And he's saying, go over to the enemy and live, because you stay here, you're going to die. So then the official said to the king, this man should be put to death. He's discouraging the soldiers who are left in the city, as well as all the people, by saying to them, this man is not seeking the good of these people, but their ruin. And the king, Zedekiah, says, do what you need to do with the man. So here's what they do to Jeremiah. They took Jeremiah, put him in a cistern, they lowered him by rope into a cistern, and had no water in it, only mud, and Jeremiah sank down in the mud. So because of his prophecy, they, in effect, just leave him to die. Look at what Babylon does to him. Now, this is a few chapters after. This is when Babylon's now broken through. The word came to Jeremiah from the Lord after Nebuzaradan, the commander of the imperial guard, had released him at Ramah. He had found Jeremiah bound in chains among the captives. When commander of the guard found him, he says, the Lord your God decreed this disaster for this place. So they found out that Jeremiah was prophesying that Babylon will break through. Now the Lord has brought it about. He has done just as he would. All this happened because you people sinned against the Lord and did not obey him. I mean, the guile of this commander. But look at what he says to Jeremiah. He says, today I am freeing you from the chains on your wrist. So his people leave him to die. The worldly man, the Babylonian commander, says, go, you're free. So my point I'm making is that when we preach covenant faithfulness, who might be our biggest obstacle, our biggest challenge? The world or the church? Sobering question. This is a question I ask. What would you say is the greatest threat to Christianity? Yeah, the woke culture. The woke culture is the biggest threat to Christianity, or whatever, flavor of the month. But I put forth before you the biggest threat, greatest threat is from within. When the people of God refuse to listen, when the leaders of the people of God refuse to listen to God's call, that's the greatest threat. Because that's what it is, right? I mean, we even looked at these prophetic messages to the leaders, to the priests, to the prophets. They're the audience of these prophets. Now, that doesn't absolve the common people from their own participation in, but it also just shows us that leadership matters. When leaders do not obey God's call to covenant faithfulness, it's a bad deal. Our greatest threat is from within. And so hopefully you remember this. Hopefully you'll call us to it. And hopefully when you become leading churches, leading church leaders who lead church leaders, you'll remember that the greatest call for us is not growth, is not numbers, it's not baptisms, it is life of covenant faithfulness. Now it's very well possible that you might be my boss one day. Or or you might be my team lead, because you might not pay me at that point. I might be in my 60s, but it's possible I could just as well be working for you in 10 years' time, So my point I'm making is that I'm praying and hoping that you see great examples of covenant faithfulness from our generation. So when it comes to you leading us, that you can model the same. Does that make sense? That the onus is on us. Because if you don't see us do that, then you're not doing that for us, and then we're just it's a bad break, But again, just to keep that in mind, that's the lesson from Jeremiah. When we live covenant faithful lives, the world around us will be changed. And that's what Jesus says, go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them. He's saying, live covenant faithful lives, go make covenant faithful disciples, the world will change. When we don't, it's not going to go well. It's going to be ugly. Matthew 5:13, you are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven.